What's going on, guys? We're back. We got a new Cappy Army video, man. We love Cappy on this channel. Please make sure you go show love to his channel, man. We react to all of his stuff, and the least we could do is, and by we, I mean myself, by using his content like this, the least I could do is ask you guys to go show love on his channel, man. So, because he puts a lot of work and effort, and his team makes great content. So this says, America's terrorizing Iran's new shadow army. Whew. Yo, I released a spicy video last night where I said, basically, I explained my take on the Jews are always the problem stigma in the world, mostly the US, in my experience. And I thought I was going to get a lot of hate in the comments, man. And as always, you guys were cool as heck and actually agreed with me on a lot of the points. So very cool. Anyways, my point is that kind of tied into what's happening here in the Middle East. We've got, because I recently put out another video about setting a precedent, what it looks like when the United States looks weak on a global stage. When the US looks weak on a global stage, the world looks weak. The bad actors of the world see this as an opportunity to exploit and take advantage of the world at a weakened state because the US is tied up in negotiations with Iran for the 1000th year in a row. And the Strait of Hormuz is open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close. And the United States refuses to take a decisive stance and either pull out, say, okay, we're done, pull out, or say, that's enough, go in, right? Instead of this 1 foot in, 1 foot out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. The amount of headlines, dude, it literally boils my blood. I wake up in the morning, it says, new strikes in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran attacks 3 cargo ships. Within a couple of hours, there's a new Fox News headline saying, deal just on the horizon between U.S. delegation and Iranian delegation. I'm like, dude, what? And then right after that, you got Trump making 48 tweets, and he's like, we're going to bomb these dudes into the Stone Ages. And then right after that, he's like, we're really close to a deal. It's like, what is happening, dude? So anyways, kind of went on a tangent there. Hey, if you want one of our anti-Putin social club t-shirts, link is in the description. Also, Discord link in the description. Jump in there. We talk about this kind of stuff.
Reroute Middle Eastern oil through Iraq. And I want to show you why America is now trying to reroute Middle Eastern oil through Iraq, and how an armed militia network inside the country called the PMF could determine whether Iran ever loses its grip on the Strait of Hormuz.
American and Saudi forces conducted joint strikes against what they are calling Iran-backed terror sites in Iraq.
On a map, the solution to circumventing the strait looks really easy. You just move the oil through pipelines in Iraq and around the region instead. But this is where the plan hits a major problem, because for the past decade, American military forces and Iranian-backed proxy groups have been fighting a war inside of Iraq, one that is increasingly becoming Iraq War Part 3 straight to streaming, and the outcome of the battle may determine if Iran can quickly shut down these new pipelines with one single order. And so today, we're going to try to answer 4 main questions. Who actually controls the use of force inside of Iraq? How did these militias become so powerful that they could challenge the state? And can Iraq bring them under control without triggering another civil war? And at the end, we'll ask exactly how much would these alternative pipelines really reduce Iran's leverage in Hormuz? I'm Chris Cappy, a former infantryman. Hit the like and subscribe button to get 3 new military rundowns each week. On Thursday, July 30th, Iran launched a surprise attack, firing 5 ballistic missiles on a US base in Jordan. Each shot was intercepted by Patriot air defense batteries. Meanwhile, Iran was coordinating with their proxies on the ground inside of Iraq. The Iraqi PMF was ordered by Tehran to fire attack drones at Saudi Arabian oil infrastructure. In retaliation, America and Saudi Arabia launched their first ever joint strikes. Combined warfare is getting uncomfortably combined. They strike dozens of targets across Iraq, hitting multiple popular mobilization forces bases, killing over 20 fighters and wounding dozens more. And so we see how the Iran-backed PMF is already launching attacks on oil infrastructure in the region, and Iraq gives them the perfect central location to hit everywhere from Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. The Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF, are a network of dozens of Iraqi militias that are part of the country's official security forces alongside the Iraqi army and the Iraqi police. But several of its most powerful factions remain closely aligned and backed by Iran, meaning Baghdad pays and legally recognizes these armed groups, the PMF, that can take orders, weapons, and strategic direction from Iran. Before we get back to the episode, it's important that you get your credit squared away with today's partner, Kickoff. A few years ago, I had my credit score take a huge hit because I accidentally missed a payment that I'd forgotten about. It's frustrating, but once it's fixed, it opens up a lot of doors. And my favorite thing about Kickoff is it's simple. It only takes a few minutes right from your phone. It's just $1 for your first month, and there's no credit check, no hidden fees, no interest. Users with credit under 600 grow an average of 86 points just by paying on time. Kickoff is the #1 credit builder on the App Store with over 1 million users and hundreds of thousands of positive reviews. Start building credit with Kickoff today and get your first month for as little as $1. That's 80% off the normal price when you go to kickoff.com/Cappy today. Must sign up via kickoff.com/Cappy to activate offer. Offer applies to new Kickoff customers, first month only, subject to approval. Offer subject to change. Average first year credit score impact of plus 86 points between August 2024 and August 2025 for Kickoff credit account users who started with a score below 600, who paid on time, and who had no delinquencies or collections added to their credit profile during the period. Late payments may negatively impact your credit score and individual results may vary. So CENTCOM described the attacks against the PMF as hitting Iranian terrorist weapon sites across eastern Iraq. In response, Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces stated that the attacks were a flagrant violation of Iraqi territorial integrity. And in the middle of all of this is the official Iraqi government asking both sides to please stop. And that's why Iraq is so important to how the Middle East balance of power is being reshaped right now, I think, because Iraq is located in the center of this conflict. But where did this armed group even come from? No one heard of the PMF before recently. The PMF has its roots initially as militias that were funded and armed by Iran during the US occupation of Iraq after 2003. To oversimplify it, what happened is Shia Iran exploited the power vacuum of the Iraqi Sunni government being toppled. They increased their influence by funding Shia militia groups inside of Iraq, because power vacuums are famously always filled by calm, responsible people with modest regional ambitions. The PMF was made up of about 70 different armed factions that slowly became their own army that rivals the Iraqi National Army in firepower. After the US withdrawal from Iraq in 2011, it seemed like the Iraq War was over and everyone could live happily ever after, but that was wishful thinking. The PMF exploded in power after that, because the IRGC funneled weapons and money to them to help stop the Islamic State's advance in 2014. Many PMF fighters played an important role in retaking that territory, and so Iraq later legalized the organization and incorporated it into the state security system, placing it, at least on paper, under the Prime Minister's command. That was a kind of...
That's Soleimani, right? So they paid in blood. Is that Soleimani? I can't tell. They paid in blood, basically. They helped the Iraqi government fight ISIS out of the land and destroy ISIS, and the government was basically like, okay, we'll recognize you as an official, outfit that defends our country. And then that's how you basically have another Iranian proxy state. That's crazy.
Thank you for helping us kick ISIS out. Think of it kind of like the Army National Guard in America as a point of reference, but more paramilitary. But combined, they're estimated to have at least 160,000 to as high as 240,000 combined fighters, with a $3.6 billion budget from Iraqi taxpaying. So they now represent one of the largest and most powerful Iranian-backed groups now that Hezbollah and Hamas have taken major blows from battling Israel for years. They're closely entwined with Iraq's culture because they have government ministers and seats in parliament. What that all means, though, is that it has created an unusual situation. The United States is conducting military strikes against the PMF that are connected, at least formally, to the security forces of Iraq, which is also a partner of America. It's this meme, but literally and unironically. And the cycle has been accelerating fast from there. Since October 2023, Iran-backed groups have launched repeated rocket attacks against American positions across Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. The United States has answered with increasingly large strikes against command centers. They've knocked out weapon storage sites. It's been this growing tit for tat that you've probably missed in the background. In early 2024 alone, the Pentagon recorded more than 150 attacks against American forces in Iraq and Syria, before then launching strikes against more than 80 targets across both countries. Now, Washington and Baghdad said that the remaining American troops will leave Iraq by September 30th, 2026. Depending on how generously you interpret Pentagon vocabulary, this is approximately the fourth or fifth time that the United States has announced that they were ending their mission in Iraq. Iraq, I wish I knew how to quit you. But whether or not American troops actually leave, the more important question, I think, is what happens to Iraqi forces after US troops are completely gone? Would it collapse to an Iranian-backed organization that would take over? And so some of the most important new energy pipeline infrastructure currently being built on Earth is within firing range of Iraq. And the Iranian-backed PMF reached a turning point at the end of 2019. It began with a rocket attack at the K-1 base near Kirkuk that killed an American contractor and wounded US and Iraqi personnel. Washington, D.C. blamed a PMF-related group for this. The United States retaliated with airstrikes against 5 Katib Hezbollah facilities in Iraq and Syria, killing 25 fighters. 2 days later, in retaliation, hundreds of PMF members and supporters entered Baghdad's green zone and surrounded the American embassy. They smashed windows, they burned a reception area, they covered walls in all this anti-American graffiti, and they threw stones at the Marines that were defending the compound. The Marines answered with tear gas while American Apache helicopters circled overhead. Most healthy diplomatic relationships certainly involve Apache helicopters circling above embassies. The standoff ended after Iraq's government and senior PMF leaders ordered the crowd to withdraw. But the incident signaled the start of this new conflict in Iraq that we're getting into, because the competition for who influenced the nation was beginning. An armed organization connected to the Iraqi state had attacked an American diplomatic compound with little resistance from the official Iraqi security forces. This is until the US sought to destroy the IRGC in Iran to cut off the government supporting the PMF. And during the opening weeks of the 2026 war in Iran, American and Israeli aircraft started striking PMF positions across Iraq. PMF military bases were hit. They attempted to assassinate top PMF leaders in Iraq.
I was going to say, hopefully the PMF's smarter than to get involved against allies, right? The US or US allies. But that's going to be hard to do if we're bombing them. So I guess that ship has sailed. Oof.
To decapitate their influence. It was a systematic top-down approach, an attempt to destroy the PMF. On the other side, the IRGC in Iran sent in their covert fighters to back the PMF.
Tell me these are not the same dude. Right here and right here. No?
The campaign escalated in late March when American aircraft struck a PMF headquarters in Anbar, Iraq, while senior commanders were meeting inside until they were vaporized. Everyone's worst nightmare, dying in an administrative meeting. At least 15 fighters were killed, including the PMF's operations commander for the province. Then, footage emerged showing American A-10 Warthogs flying low over Iraq, hitting one of the PMF bases, firing its 30mm cannon at positions on the ground. But the location of the attack exposed the deeper political problem here, I think. One of the bases hit was an official government military installation used by both the Iraqi army and the PMF militia force. So Iraqi soldiers were reportedly killed in the attack. That is what makes this conflict so messy. Many of the people and facilities being targeted are also part of Iraq's official security system, who are US partner forces. And so 8 weeks after the war in Iran started, President Trump put Iraq's entire US cash-based economy under pressure because of the PMF. The United States ordered a stop, a halt, to nearly $500 million worth of physical US dollar currency that was being shipped to Iraq. This was funds from Iraqi oil sales that were blocked by America over concerns that the money was going to the PMF, backed by Iran. The move was heavy pressure on Baghdad to align itself more geopolitically, more closely with Washington, D.C. It's like when you ask your friend to choose between friends. Usually it just makes things awkward for everyone. But Iraq had already been talking about controlling the Iran-backed militias for years and getting a handle on that situation. But this really lit a fire under them and sent things into action. Baghdad ordered the Iran-aligned factions to totally disarm. Suddenly, the US dollars started flowing again to Iraq. The message was subtle by Treasury Department standards. To try to settle the problem peacefully, the Iraqi government then tried to bring all of the PMF armed formations under the direct authority of the state. That could mean restructuring the Popular Mobilization Forces, disarming factions that refuse government orders, forcefully or dissolving groups that continue to operate independently outside of government control. But that was, as you might have guessed, resisted. The geopolitical equivalent of everyone turn in your weapons by close of business, which armed organizations traditionally respect, as we all know. And of course, several Iranian-backed militia leaders then refused those demands to disarm, because surrendering their weapons would also mean surrendering much of their geopolitical leverage. At the center of this struggle is one of the most basic principles of state power, the monopoly on the legitimate use of force. One of the theories I found most interesting was written by sociologist Max Weber, where he put it as the state's monopoly on violence in his 1919 lecture. Iraq is the capitalism of violence. They are several different competing franchises for the control of violence. What it means is a functioning government must be able to decide who carries weapons, who's authorized to use them, and when military action is permitted. It cannot fully control its own territory if there are armed factions running around willy-nilly, ignoring orders, launching attacks abroad, or dragging the country into a war that the elected government never approved. The reason all of this is important on a regional strategic scale is because Iraq's internal power struggle is becoming a global energy security problem. The United States is now supporting diplomatically and financially several new energy projects that are intended to move Gulf and Iraqi oil north and west, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Halliburton would be proud. So, how much exactly do experts believe the new pipelines would be able to reduce Iran's leverage? Let's take a look at that question. One proposal would restore the roughly 800-kilometer Kirkuk pipeline, carrying Iraqi crude oil across Syria to the Mediterranean. Its expected capacity is around 300,000 barrels per day. For Iraq, that would protect nearly 9% of their exports from any Iranian closure. Another pipeline would build a new line from southern oil fields around Iraq's Basra, where it could branch toward Syria, Turkey, or Jordan. And beyond that, Iraq and Turkey are also discussing expanding the Kirkuk route to Turkey, which could theoretically carry as much as 1.5 million barrels per day to the Mediterranean. Across the entire Gulf, though, 7 proposed projects could eventually push and bypass capacity above 14 million barrels per day, which experts believe mathematically would move between 60 to 70% of what used to go through the Strait of Hormuz. So those pipelines would not totally eliminate Iran's leverage, but they could turn Hormuz from a near total veto over the global economy into a pain point instead.
Or they become another choke point and another asset for the enemies of the West to hold hostage.
Which is exactly why Iran-aligned militias have positioned themselves along these land routes, because every one of these routes would exchange basically a maritime vulnerability for a vulnerability on land that the Iran-backed PMF could exploit. A pipeline running hundreds of kilometers across Iraq is vulnerable to a drone strike or sabotage operation at a pumping station that would interrupt the flow. And this threat is a reality already. During the opening months of the Iran war, these PMF Iraqi factions attacked oil fields around Basra, foreign personnel evacuated, and production declined sharply. Some of the country's most important economic assets became targets in a war that Iraq's government had never chosen to enter. Pipelines through Turkey or Syria would reduce Iran's ability to use the Strait of Hormuz as leverage over Iraq. So the plan to bypass Hormuz depends on partly if Iraq can become a secure energy corridor. Iraq's government has been one of the most heavily affected by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz because this is where most of its oil is normally exported. Since the start of the Iran war, they have been struggling to stop the conflict between the US and Iran from spilling over into its borders as airstrikes and missile attacks over their airspace are fired over their heads almost daily. According to an article by The Guardian that spoke to an Iranian official, the factions were largely under Iraqi government control until the killing of Khamenei, which changed everything according to him. He said, quote, "You can't ask the factions to not participate anymore. This is an existential struggle and a religious duty," end quote. Iranian officials had told him that US covert action smuggled 40,000 Starlink devices through Iraqi territory to bypass Iran's internet shutdown. But Baghdad's plan to gain control contains a major contradiction, a catch-22, or a chicken before the egg kind of problem, if you will. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani says that the government cannot realistically disarm these factions while American troops remain inside of Iraq. Those are the very troops that give the PMF reason to exist, he says. As long as there are foreign American troops in Iraq, Sudani says those factions will continue to possess a ready-made kind of justification for operating outside the government's complete control. The United States currently has about 2,000 troops remaining in Iraq. After withdrawing from an airbase in Iraq, the force is concentrated mainly at one principal hub near Erbil, with a smaller advisory presence in Baghdad. These American troops are primarily advisors. You got intelligence specialists, it's logisticians, communications personnel, and force protection units. But they can still coordinate surveillance, special operations raids, and airstrikes using the much larger US network of drones and aircraft and regional bases. So Sudani's proposed solution is based on sequencing. First, the US multinational coalition would completely withdraw their forces. Then, Baghdad begins a formal program to eliminate weapons outside of state institutions. So, eliminate weapons that are in the PMF. Individual fighters are absorbed into Iraq's official security forces, while militia leaders who want to retain political influence could lay down their weapons and compete through elections instead. It's a model that's been done before a few times with similar groups like FARC in Colombia, and on paper it sounds relatively straightforward. Sudani summarized the objective by saying that Iraq's state institutions must control the decision of war and peace, and that no outside power or domestic faction should be able to pull the country into another war. And that's true for both America and the PMF. That is the real test of Iraq's monopoly on violence. Iraq, on a geopolitical level, is simultaneously trying to attract American investment, expand its oil and gas industry, and reduce its dependence on imported Iranian gas. Iraq's Prime Minister Sudani said there are major projects involving the American oil companies that hinge on this. So Iraq is attempting an extremely delicate tightrope balancing act. Failure would leave Iraq with fewer American troops, heavily armed factions that still answer to Iran, and a government unable to prevent its own territory from being used in the next regional war. Success, though, would give the people of Iraq greater independence, something that they've been fighting for now for over 2 decades, while the US and Iran fight over them. If you like this episode, I think you'll like this one about US black ops in Iran that you legitimately wouldn't believe. I'm Chris Cappy. Thank you very much for watching.
Great video, of course. Please check out Cappy's channel. A couple things, guys, and then we'll wrap it up. But pop quiz. What would be the solution to this issue in Iraq between basically the United States, the proper Iraqi government and their military, which are still allies to the US, and then this PMF, or Public Militia Force, whatever, Popular Militia Force, which is backed by Iran? What would be the solution? It all goes back to the same place, right? The Houthis, where does that lead back to? Hamas, where does that lead back to? The PMF, Where does that lead back to? Hezbollah. Where does that lead back to? Iran. Every single time it's Iran. If Iran's absolutely obliterated, and by Iran, I don't mean the Iranian people, I mean the IRGC. The IRGC is completely dismantled, eliminated, stomped into the dirt, and like that, right? Now they're no longer funding this PMF group. Now the US and the Iraqi government and military can continue to cooperate as allies and make this oil infrastructure, make all this stuff work. I solved it. Somebody call the Pentagon. Somebody sent comments. Drop the Pentagon's number. I'll give them a shout. Let them know. Hey, yo, Donnie, I got the answer. All right, guys, do me a favor, like, share, subscribe. I love you. We'll see you in the next video.